Most of us dream about quitting our full time jobs in order to do what we love. In fact, that might just be why you're listening to this very podcast, full of interviews about how artists around the world manage to figure out how the heck to make a living from the things we make. But what if instead of thinking of your full time job as the thing holding you back from being creative, you approached it from the perspective of the thing that allows you to be creative? Maybe not necessarily while doing that job, although this week's guest, one could argue, gets to do that too. But thanks to the reliability of that job, you get to make whatever you want to make, whatever you're most curious about, without worrying about whether or not you can sell it. Okay, maybe the fact that this week's guest works full time for Amico isn't going to feel like the same grind of going into an office every day like you might be doing. I hear you, my friends. I know what you're thinking. And yes, a job that drains you of energy and sucks your soul straight out of you for 8 hours every day, of course, is different. But what if, just for even a little moment, you could look at it as a thing that provides room for your creativity, rather than the thing that hinders it? What would that do for your day-to-day life? Now, before I get any more philosophical, let's get to the point. This week on the podcast, I'm chatting with the one and only Cory Brown. Yes, of drippy, practically levitating glaze lore. Cory is part of the team behind figuring out all of that chemistry behind some of your favorite glazes, like Honey Flux. And speaking of Honey Flux, you probably saw this segue coming. You may have noticed that Amico isn't taking direct orders on their website currently. And while that might feel like a bad thing, the reason for it is pretty great. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focusing on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focused on making sure your favorite local shop is supported even before their own website. And you can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local clay shop and avoid all those extra shipping costs. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days, but Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small businesses first, now and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are, which you know I'm all about. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. A big thanks to Amico for sponsoring the Maker's Playbook podcast and helping me cross off this wish list interview from my own list. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, 12-year self-employed veteran, Rebecca Ikes Cara. Hey, Cory, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rebecca, thanks for having me.
I know nobody's going to be able to see this, but I've been wanting to say it. I think you officially have the largest mug wall I have
Is that right?
ever seen.
It is pretty large, and I do get a lot of comments on it. This is normally where I have video meetings at, and every time it's a new person, they're like, what is that? And
It's glorious.
yeah, thank you. It's like, what is it? It's 150 mugs, or 150 openings anyway, and they're pretty much full. But it is my wife and I collection together, so they're not all mine. But living in Alfred, it's like easy to get. New mugs are coming through all the time.
They just arrive on your doorstep, like without question. You don't know how they got there.
Not quite exactly that easy, but yeah, there's a lot of mugs around here. And plenty of them are mine too, so.
Well, see, that's a whole different situation then. For people who don't know who the heck I'm looking at, before I get ahead of myself here, how would you introduce yourself?
I am Cory Brown. I'm a ceramic artist and a glaze developer. I work for Amico and design new glazes remotely from Alfred, New York. I have a historical house right on Main Street downtown that used to be a print shop, and I'm kind of like looking out onto Main Street in Alfred right now.
What qualifies as a historical house in Alfred? Now I want to know more about this house, actually. I'm going to take a total right turn on this conversation.
It's a 1893 building, and it was built to be the Sun Publishing in Alfred, and they printed the Alfred Sun for 120 years. And then the printing kind of just has gone downhill because of the internet and also just like mass printers that, print a lot of different newspapers can do it more efficiently than a small place like this. And so it kind of was closed for a couple of years, and we were looking to buy a place, and it was pretty affordable. It was gutted completely. We put so much sweat equity into it. Where our living space and our studio space was just completely empty. Where my kitchen is right here, there was no gas, there was no water. We've built all the cabinets. We've installed everything ourselves.
That actually sounds exponentially easier than our 1927 house, which was not gutted, and sometimes I think would have been easier. But grass is always greener.
Gutted it. Yeah.
We'll have to compare notes.
This is also a brick building, brick inside and brick outside, and it has giant 18-inch wide I-beams going across the middle of the space. So it's like, it feels very industrial. Like it's a historical industrial building, which I think is different than I have no idea what your house looks like, but when I hear an old house, I just assume it's got plaster lath, it's wood, and
no insulation.
No insulation. There's a lot of mysteries inside the walls in there,
Oh yeah, or outside.
Right. But for my house, everything, like, this house is older than electricity, than electricity being normal in a house. And so everything is surface mounted because the walls were built before you could have had that going through there, which your house might be too. But it's easy to get through the utilities, is my point, because it's all on the outside. So
at least for us, all of the plumbing and gas lines are the basement's unfinished. So as far as setting up like the kiln and some of the glaze mixing and stuff that we have are all in the basement for us. And that is like, you can just track it and be like, okay, well, that's the water line and we need the sink here. So great, cool, done, no problem.
Exactly. Same for me. And so, yeah, a lot of people, their challenge with doing homework like that is like, it's in the wall and I don't know where it is. We don't know. It just ends there and we can't figure it out. And but not for us. It's just like, follow the line. That's where the problem is. Fix it. So.
Welcome to the Maker's House Renovation Show, everyone. This is now changed. We're changing the entire ethos of the podcast. Okay, but I do have a question because you said our studio, and it takes a special kind of partner to say yes to moving into a house that's not a house. So give us a little context on who your wife is and why she's willing to do this.
Yeah, she's crazy. I don't know what she was thinking. No, I think we both love this house and we love working on it together. And we didn't know that before we had it. We were in New York City renting an apartment before we moved to Alfred. But we're both ceramic artists. We're both makers. And so we kind of feel like we live in a sculpture. You know what I mean? There's always some project going on. We don't do everything together, but we do different parts of the project together. She does a lot of like painting and trim and finishing. And I'll do like kind of the more major utility type stuff, actually installing pipes and wiring and wood floor type stuff.
Gotcha. So. Okay, this makes more, because I was trying to think, knowing you guys moved out of New York City to Alfred, and I'm like, I understand why you might have done it, knowing a little bit of your history and what you're up to and doing it. And I'm like, okay, but it's different when you're making a life with another person and getting somebody else to be willing to uproot their life to go from major city to dot on a map, and why be willing to do all of that. So that's just helpful context.
Yeah, it's true. But it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before this podcast started, which was about kind of the cost of living in cities. And I think we were both on board with, we were never going to be able to buy a house in New York City. We were living, just to clarify, right before we moved here in Port Chester, which is 10 miles north of the Bronx, where Clay Art Center is. And so it wasn't in the city where we last were. But it was never going to be in our reality to own our own home there. And which also means like probably never going to own a studio, probably always going to be renting. And so moving out of the city was appealing in that way. And so she was on board to come along for the ride. Plus, we moved for me to go to grad school at Alfred, which, there's a lot of promise and hope of a good future if you get into a good school. And so it was kind of like, let's do this and see what better thing we can have.
Well, and so give us a little bit of a timeline, too, to just give everybody all the context of, I actually don't remember because I kind of intentionally don't deep dive too much down the internet rabbit hole on people because for people listening, I find there's always somebody who has a question they want to ask, but feels like everybody else in the room knows the answer. And so I just feign ignorance on all the things for the podcast. So are you still you're teaching at Alfred now, right? You've already graduated, or no? I'm off.
Let's see. So we moved to Alfred in 2015. I got my MFA in 2017. And then I taught adjunct for maybe 3 or 4 semesters up until the pandemic hit. And then I haven't taught adjunct since then. In 2017 summer, I started working for Amico. So for some of that there, I was doing both Amico and teaching. And now I just do full-time Amico. And I'm an artist.
People might just slightly know your work, yeah. They might have seen some drippy things before. It's kind of gaining popularity. I don't know. What were you guys doing, the two of you doing beforehand in 2015? Like, because both being artists in New York City, okay, I know you're saying you were just out of the city, but you weren't so far out for that to be any easier. That's no joke.
No, we met at the Clay Arts Center, which is a residency. And we both met as residents. Our studios were next to each other. And I guess we met in 2012. That's when we started the residency, and then finished our residencies. And then we both ended up being full-time employees there. I became the building manager and my wife was the program manager.
Cool.
And we did that for 2 years until I applied for graduate school.
Cool.
And we love Clay Arts Center. It was a wonderful place, but I don't think that the building manager job is not something you retire with. You know what I mean? It's a very labor-intensive job. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong in it. And it was an old building too, near the city. And it was all my responsibility and it was exhausting. And I love Clay Arts Center to death, but I think everyone would understand. You can't, had to move on and move upward. So
they might also laugh a little bit because they'd be like, yeah, you went from just showing up to deal with the building problems to literally living in.
That's true. I think that our ability to manage this house has, I learned a lot at Clay Arts Center managing that building, which was a similar age and similar problems. And so I'm glad that I didn't have to start from scratch when I got this house or when we got this house.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about what the transition. I'm just now highly encouraged and relieved to know somebody else who has a partner that works in the arts who are making it work both together full time. Because part of the impetus of starting this podcast was to have conversations like that for me to figure out how we can make it work personally.
Absolutely.
And that's not the norm, right? Like most artists out there, if they do have a partner or a spouse, that person works in, I don't know, something stable.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And, when we decided to stay in Alfred, I did not have a full-time job. We bought this house on a leap of faith, essentially, because we knew that we didn't want to chase each other around the country doing kind of whatever the 1 semester, 1-year contract visiting professor thing. It's so hard to get those jobs. It's easy to get a 1-year job, but it's hard to get the tenure track job. And I think, we had to have a hard conversation, which is like, do we just both apply and then we follow and we move to Alabama or wherever we get the job? And it seemed like I just know so many friends that are trying to do that. And some of them are going to make it and it's really great for them. But I think we decided that wasn't for us and we needed to figure out another way. And I don't know, honestly, I don't know what we were thinking. I mean, Alfred's a wonderful place. And so we just were like, I guess we might as well buy a house and try to figure it out here. Caitlin, my wife, had a job at the school. At the time, she was working at the Ceramic Art Museum. Not making a lot of money, though. It's not like we were like, oh, we'll be fine here. We've been hustling the whole time. But the Amico thing was just so lucky. It just happened. And, because it's not like there's a lot of other ceramics remote jobs that I could do. So if that didn't come up, it was probably going to be me getting what I could get from Alfred University or just selling my own work, which is very hard to do.
There's 2 questions that come from that. One maybe follows the other, or pick which you want to go for. The obvious one being, how did, when we say, oh, something fell into our lap, it's like, well, how did that actually come to be? In tandem with explaining what you actually do at Amico. But then secondly, also, you do have your own body of work. You are actively pursuing this incredibly artistic, exploratory thing. And so kind of what potentially that either would have looked like or what you were thinking about in terms of selling your work, or if that just was I really don't want to have to worry about doing that because I want to be able to explore more. That's the longer question. So maybe the Amico question first.
Okay, I'll answer the first one first. How did that happen and what do I actually do? So how it happened is the stars perfectly aligned and an opportunity was presented to itself and I walked through it, right? But basically, I've been interested in glazes for a long time. I took my first glaze calc class in 2003. And I think it was always in my future to do something like this, but I didn't know that a job like this even existed. I didn't know that people were doing this. And I don't know that many people really are. But basically what happened was I'm going to tell the little bit longer story, I guess. When I got to graduate school, I remember before I got there, I was thinking, I need to really brush up on all my glaze calc stuff. I need to make sure I'm top notch by the time I get there because I just had this concern that everyone else was going to know more about materials than me and more about ceramics than me. And I just really needed to brush up on all that stuff. Not that, I was already a building manager. I was already making glazes for my job, but I just had that concern, I need to get better at this. And then when I got there, I found out nobody cared about it at all. I was the only one who was concerned at all with ceramic materials. They were all great artists, concerned about their content and the ideas that they had, but no one cared about, recalculating glazes and UMF and just things that I was naturally interested in. And I think other people have come through the program that are also interested, but the time that I came, eight grad students come at a time together, every year, 8 grad students. The 7 others in my cohort were not interested really. And so I had a little bit of special treatment in a way, because there's a lot of facility here. There's a lot of resources for ceramic engineering, a lot of technical resources here. And so one thing that happened was we have a raw materials class and everybody takes it and everybody is required to take it. I was the only one who was interested in the class. And then there's a follow-up class that is basically you and Bill Cardy. Do you know who Bill Cardy is?
Personally, no.
He's a ceramic engineer. He's well known in the field. He's presented at NCECA a lot. And he actually is just retired recently, but he offered a class that was to ceramic grads where you would go into ceramic engineering and sit around a boardroom and talk about your ideas. And he would use fancy equipment if he needed to, or just kind of go over technical issues with you to help you develop whatever you're working on. Well, when that class came up, I was the only one who took it. Whereas usually it's half the class takes it, at least 4 or 6 people take it. And so at that time, it was just me and Bill. John Gill came to it, and it was just the 3 of us talking about my nerdy ceramic ideas. They were all pretty technical. And so I got a good rapport with those guys. And then NCECA happened in 2015. And I was demoing for Bailey Ceramics during NCECA. And so I was very visible. I was in a findable place at NCECA. And Amoco simultaneously, they needed a couple different things. They needed a problem solved, but they were interested in having a person come develop glazes for them. They went to the Alfred booth and they said, do you know somebody like this? And I'm surprised they didn't say Matt Katz, to be honest, in retrospect. But what they did say is they said, you need Bill Cardy. And he's right over there. And so Bill was right there, and Bill knew I was demoing in the Bailey booth, and he's like, I got your guy. And he brought them over to the Bailey booth, and it was just if I wouldn't have been demoing at Bailey, if Bill wouldn't have been right there, if Amoco didn't ask the right people at the right time, that first interaction never would have happened. But it did. And so I met them, and it was really nice, very, pleasant. Everyone's just being nice, and do you want to interested in maybe doing something with us? And I said, of course. I'm still in grad school at the time, so it was let's see. And then that summer, Amoco kind of did a baby step of asking Alfred Engineering if they would kind of work on a project. And Bill Cardy hired me to work for the summer on that project. They had a problem they needed to have solved. And so we worked on it all summer. We ended up solving their problem. I went through my whole second year of graduate school. At the end of it, they said, do you want, we don't know what this looks like. Do you want to make glazes for us? Do you want to do some part-time development remotely? And I just said, sure. I already had another opportunity teaching. And so I couldn't do full-time at that time. Not that they were asking me to. It's run by a family essentially. And so it's just a couple of people need to make decisions over there. And so they're open to maybe let's try this way and see what happens. And so that's basically how it went down. And they, when I just started, I did 12 or 15 hours a week, miscellaneous 1099, paid my taxes afterward type thing.
Yep.
And then the teaching became less interesting to me than the glaze development. And I just kept on kind of okay, well, let's do 20 hours now. And then at a certain point, I guess September 2018, I went full-time. It was just this is what I like doing. Can I do this? And I became full-time employee. So that's the how. And what I actually do is design new Cone 6 glazes primarily. We have a glaze line called the Potter's Choice, and it is essentially like the idea of the glaze line was to be like Cone 10 reduction looks, like just, not flat color, like interesting reactions and crystals and, floating blues and just, aventurines and just interesting snazzy glazes. And it's a whole group of new ones. And they asked me to just contribute to that line. And so the overarching job is to make 5 new glazes a year for that line, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's hard to make. Like we've had hundreds of glazes. We've been around for over 100 years. To make something new that we haven't sold before is challenging. So that's like kind of the basic job. And then a lot of other stuff comes up, like especially right now, because supply chain stuff has caused certain things to just not exist anymore. And often it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, well, that will last the night is gone and we have to use a different will last the night. And it's essentially the same thing. If you looked at the UMF in the glaze calculator, it's exactly the same thing. But in practical application, you might need to tweak something,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that kind of thing right now, especially reformulating glazes.
I'm sure, because if it's the same color on the bottle, and I've got a bottle that I've had for 6 months and I'm buying a new bottle from you guys, and it's got to be the same, the consistency level that you guys have to live up to is a whole different bag of tricks than somebody who's saying, oh, well, I make small batch and nothing matches and don't worry about it. It's like, you can't say that.
Yeah. Oh, we've heard a lot of stuff where people are like, they make a living off of these glazes. They're making pottery. They've been making it for 20 years with this glaze. And then, God forbid it comes out and it's different and that's our fault. Yeah. And that stuff happens. I mean, glazes are complicated. Ceramics is complicated and things go wrong sometimes. And we do our very best to avoid that. And we have a whole team of people who, just in quality control, checking every glaze. We make a batch of glaze, 60 gallons. We double check, triple check that everything is just right before we bottle it up and send it out. But, things happen. Things slip through the cracks. So
I also think ceramics is such a refreshing and also difficult. And I'm saying this now as the girl who's been self-employed for 12 years who needs to learn how to take her foot off the pedal, married to the guy who's like, it's okay, we can do it tomorrow, right? Because that's like Italian culture. So, but specific also to ceramics is like, I can't think of another industry where the goal is to develop 5 new glazes a year. And yeah, on number, that sounds like, why couldn't you possibly do more than 5, right? Like 2022 culture, Instagram stories only last for 24 hours. So what do you mean you can only do 5 glazes in a year? But like in reality, that's the amount of time you need. I'm sure that number isn't pulled out of thin air.
No, it's not. And to make those 5, I'm going to make thousands to get there. You know what I mean? We could release more glazes than that if we wanted to, but I think 5 is the right number. Like if you release 10, a few of them are going to get lost. Like people are not even going to see. They're going to look at the more snazzy ones where even if, they were all good, and it's like all of them could have had their day in the sun and had all the marketing and effort put into them and shown every single layering combo and all that. And 5 seems to be the sweet spot.
It's like the years when there was a year in like the Oscars or something. I'm terrible. I don't know why I think up examples that I can't fully remember. But like the year Gone with the Wind was produced or something like that. There was like 3 other movies at the same time. They never actually got the accolades. But if somebody Googles what other movies came out the same year as Gone with the Wind, or I think it's whatever it was, that like these phenomenal movies all of a sudden wind up in these lower level recognition just because something else came out at the same time.
Yep. That's a pretty good analogy. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is.
It'd be better if I actually remembered the movies.
But everybody gets your point.
Well, so how long, talking about formulating 1,000 glazes to get to 5, can you kind of quantify or put the time as far as how long it actually takes you from start to finish on one glaze to within a space? Because I'm sure if you run into issues, the time forever changes. But is it marginally quantifiable?
It's really hard to quantify. We've tried to figure it out, like if we could have a timeline and like, okay, if it takes this long to do this part and this long to do this part, then we can think out 6 months in advance and everything lines up. But it just doesn't really work that way. It's kind of, I think developing glazes is a lot like playing Battleship. Do you remember that game?
Yes.
Battleship? I think glazes is Battleship mixed with Sudoku. It's like you tweak numbers around and then you shoot your shot and you might get nothing, but you might get a little something. And it's like, is that the edge of, a giant battleship, or is that the edge of, a rowboat? And so then you do the development to like, okay, you start doing line blends and quadraxial blends to kind of blow it up and kind of look around the edges of where you made a hit. And sometimes you just get lucky and you just nail it right away, or it's easy. You see that you got something, you're like, oh, all I have to do is do a line blend with silicon aluminum ratio and I'll nail it. And then there it is. And other times, you just get into the weeds on stuff. You know what I mean? You want it to be a certain way. It's not quite right. And, it's more important for us to have the best glazes we can have than to bang out as many glazes as we can get out. Because I'm sure we could release 30 glazes a year. If we wanted to, we could release 30 glazes a year. It's better to have the more unique ones and put the time in to make them extra special. So yeah, I've had some where it's very quick. Like, oh, I tried it and that worked. Or especially if it's like a glaze that I know is good and I can make in a different color. That's usually pretty fast, or like turn that into a line. They have 5 different colors of the same look. It's got the same float to it. It's got the same, shimmery part, whatever it is. But others, like Honey Flux is one of our glazes right now. It's very popular. And it's one of those ones that it doesn't seem that complicated of a glaze, but I spent months and months and months on it, just tweaking it. And, it's not just the color. It's more of like performance. Color is usually pretty easy. It's like, does it flow off the pot? Does it cause pinholes? Does it, because like there's a fine line between having a lot of cool reactions and it failing. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's like right on the edge of that. So that's where they get more difficult.
Right. Especially as you get down to the line of like, is this being used on functional wear? Is there a problem with acidity in terms of like, if I glaze a bowl and then put sliced lemons into it, is this actually safe? Like I thought it was when I put water into it. And
yes, all that. Yeah, sometimes I'll get really far and I'll think I'm ready to go with a glaze and then it'll fail in acid or base test. And then sometimes we just axe them. We're like, yeah, it's a cool glaze, but it's not worth it. Like we're going to release 5, but I'm presenting a lot more than that to the team. Like I'm the designer, but there's sales and marketing, and we're all going to have a bunch of meetings about what we're actually going to release. And so sometimes, there'll be 10 or 12 glazes, on the table that we're kind of looking at. And it's like, well, that one, it's really, really cool. Maybe it's the coolest one, but it's not food safe. Is that the right thing to do? Because there's still a market for non-food safe glazes. It's not a deal breaker, but is it good enough? Because you're losing sales to some people that are very strict about that, or going to schools like K-12, they're just not going to buy non-food safe glazes.
Or even assuming like, oh, all the other glazes I've bought from Amico in the past are food safe, so I'm not even going to pay that close of attention. And then I buy one because it looks cool, not even knowing because I didn't read the label close enough. I'm going to resist the urge to get too far into the weeds of talking literally about glaze chemistry and like, what does make it food safe and what should people know about Cone 6? Because that feels like it's going to open up a whole bag of worms. And also, I'm not the chemist in the house. So,
I mean, I'm not really a chemist either. I feel like I'm an artist who knows about these materials. And if you really wanted to have a podcast about food and glaze safety, there's probably other people that would be better to interview for it, that they focus just on that. I make cool, pretty glazes, and like when they go through acid and base testing, I don't do that. And like leaching and all that, we send it out. Does it pass or not? And so I know the limits, and I don't know them off the top of my head. I know the limits on paperwork, but I'm not an expert on that anyway. So easy to resist it.
How does full-time work with Amico kind of balance with, because you are still doing a lot of your own exploratory, like gravity defying work, right? So how does that kind of time balance work for you? What's day-to-day life look like? A week in Cory Brown's world.
A week in Cory Brown's world. I generally get up early, excited about the kiln. That part has never gone away. I have 3 kilns in my basement, and I get up at 5 or 5:30, like, I got to go see what's in there. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter how boring or exciting it is. I always want to go and like peek, like what's going on in there. So I'm usually up early to check the kiln, and I find that my most productive linear thinking is in the morning. I really like to just kind of look at the results, make a plan of what I should do next. Like there's usually, it's obvious, it's not always obvious, but it's often obvious. Like, oh, well, that needs more flux. That needs more stain. That needs this or that. And so I'll, make notes about what everything I need to do, go into my glaze calculator and prepare all the recipes that I'm going to go make and try to make them all. I like to try to make them all before lunch or, before it gets too late. And so yeah, get in there, get the ideas, get them batched. And so then afternoon, after lunch is mostly just like applying glaze to tiles and just implementing my morning's ideas. And that's partially because I think that way works well for me. And it's partially just because that's how long it takes to make the it's like the natural progression. I'm going to make the glaze. I'm going to get them in the kiln. It's usually I'm definitely going to load my kiln at least one, most days 2 kilns to do 2 different temperatures every day. And yeah, so for the majority of Amico for maybe a year or two, we've moved to 410s, a 410 schedule. So 40 hours a week, Monday through Thursday. And so that's generally what I do. And so I have Fridays off. And so Friday, Saturday, Sunday is when I can get a lot of my studio stuff done. And that's when house projects and stuff happen too, which is still art to me in a way. And it's art that I can do with my wife. And so we like doing that. But that's generally my schedule. Sometimes I'll do some of my hard things during the workday too. Like I've kind of been given permission to do a little bit of that. It's helpful for me to be an artist as well, being a designer in ceramics. You know what I mean? I couldn't do that in a vacuum. I need to be part of the field. I need to be following stuff on social media. I need to know what's going on. I need to be a maker. So it's okay for me to do a little bit. So sometimes if something needs to just like be set up and start drawing or whatever, I can do half an hour here or whatever, half an hour there of some studio stuff during the week, during my workday. And that is super helpful because my office is in my studio. You know what I mean? It's in the same place. So it's not really, I don't think it's putting anybody out. It's all right there. And so I can kind of do it all.
At least from the outside looking in, from my perspective, also so much of your personal work is this exploration of glaze as well, right? When you said that so many of the mugs on the wall behind you are yours, I was like, I don't know that I've ever seen a Cory Brown mug. Actually, in my mind, it's, these kind of this levitating glaze, really, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. And a mug is a very stable, non-levitating device.
Yeah, I've had a long arc of what I make, and the levitating glaze, I like that. I haven't called it levitating glaze, but that sounds good. It sounds
you can
magic.
Use it. It's okay. I won't patent it. It's yours.
Okay. I've only been making the glaze drip stuff and the foam stuff for about 1.5 years. And before that, if you go look through my Instagram and look back a year or 2 years ago, and I was making all colored clay inlaid stuff. And I had kind of developed an interesting technique where I would put the pattern on an unthrown pot and then throw it with the pattern in it. And so it kind of twisted and moved. And when I met Francesco and I did a residency at La Meridiana, I was making that other work. At the time, it was really funny and ironic because I was a glaze developer then too, and I didn't really use any glaze on my work. I tell people that all the time because it'd be like, you must have so much fun using all these glazes. It's like, actually, I don't really use any.
I mean, that is like separation of church and state. That sounds like, okay, my work is my work and then my art is my art. But
yeah. But I think it was going to happen eventually anyway, because I just learned so much about glaze and I have so much access to glaze materials. I mean, I have a great lab down there with every material I could possibly want in there. And so sky's the limit. And since I know so much about glaze, I'm working on flow and viscosity. And I just am like, oh, I know how to do that. I have an idea. And just kind of one thing leads to another. And, another thing about it that I know you want to talk about, like making a living off of things. And I think that was maybe one of your second question from earlier was selling work or being an artist. And the truth is, I break even at best through my whole career of being a ceramic artist, and I know that's going to be disappointing for people to hear, but it's also like I have a full-time job. And so I'm not focused on that as much. You know what I mean? I want to make what I want to make. If I was really trying to make money, it was like, I just want to make money. I would probably be slip casting pottery. If I knew I didn't want to do ceramics still, I think that would be a way to actually do it in a way where you can make money. Making one-off experimental ceramics that are really, really breakable, that even just to ship them to a buyer is risky. And then each one is like, I get bored with it if it's not a new idea. I have to try something. And so that's not a really great way to make money necessarily either. If I had the glaze strips figured out, which I have some of them figured out, And I was like interested in just producing those. I'm going to make the same ones every day, maybe change the color a little bit, but just produce that. Then I might be able to make money. But that's not being true to myself. You know what I mean? And it's like a luxury that I'm able to be true to myself. But I like asking, what if this, what if that? And that's what energizes me. That's what gets me into the studio every day, is just like, I'm going to try to figure this thing out. What if I did that? What would happen? And so often it's nothing. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a puddle, but sometimes it's amazing. And that's the one that I put on Instagram, but that's not that's not all of them. I like the chase of something new and something exciting more than I'm trying to make money off that stuff. And I think that's why I only barely break even. And the materials are expensive that I'm using. And,
I also think that's really insightful in a way for people to hear. I know when we were first emailing, you were saying, well, I'm not self-employed. And I was saying that wasn't a requirement for the podcast, because to me, what I'm hearing is the realization of there are a lot of different ways to make this work. And you really have to decide what the actual goal is in terms of what, dare I use the word happiness, but that's a fleeting thing, right? I mean, self-employment there's days where it still sucks. Don't get me wrong,
yeah.
It's still a job. But what I'm hearing is a lot of self-awareness of knowing this is what I'm actually interested in, and doing this job actually gets me to be able to explore that more. Whereas I think a lot of people, or at least what Instagram makes it feel like, is, you've got to quit your job and be full-time. You've got to quit your job and just do your art and do what you love and whatever, when that might not actually be the best solution to like have the life you want to have.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love getting a paycheck no matter what. It allows me to have the freedom to be creative. I think that if I was making a living off the drips even, they would all be, because I would be basically desperate for money in a way, my freedom would be limited. I wouldn't be as free as the maker. And I don't think it would feel like as much fun. It would be work, But yeah, I definitely think there are more paths to making a living in ceramics than being a tenure track faculty, and I wish that more people realized that. And more people were trying to do something else. It's amazing. Every year I meet new graduate students who come here and they're like, I've been thinking about it. I think I want to teach. And it's like, oh, really? You and everybody else. It's wonderful. What do you like about it? And it's like, truly what they like about it is that they have summers off and it's pays $60,000 or whatever in healthcare. And it's not like truly that they wanted to teach. It's like, I'd like to live in a fantasy world where we think that this is how money works. I like industry. And I don't know that there's a lot of jobs available out there. You just have to be lucky like me. You know what I mean? Like there's only a few glaze companies at all, 5 or 6 well-known ones in this country. Even if they were all hiring this year, that for my job, that's only 5, 6 jobs. That's not enough to sustain everyone. But I think that there are jobs out there, and I think you shouldn't discount the opportunities that are not teaching at a school. So
actually, I'm curious, given you are in this like totally different aspect of this industry that we all love so much, what are some jobs that you've come across that are like, oh, I didn't know that you could do? Because this is the thing. I think when we're growing up, we're presented with a relatively limited list of options, right? You just don't realize all the different ways in which you can be involved in something. And I continuously think back to the family that I know from like my very small hometown, whose company they grow sod, right? So they sell grass, but one of their major clients is Wrigley Field. And nobody ever dreams, when you think about when you love baseball and you want to be involved in the major leagues baseball, nobody thinks, okay, cool, I'm going to go grow grass.
Right.
But it's an option.
But at the end of the day, they were involved. Yeah. I don't even know what the jobs are. My wife is a ceramic artist with a master's degree, and she's doing marketing and communications for the School of Art and Design. And she's like the top person in the School of Art and Design, kind of organizing. She's not the top person. She's the top person in the arts. There's other marketing people ahead of her over the whole university, but she's got a pretty decent job. And she never thought she was going to do that. She didn't go to school for that, but it's naturally her. Like she just ended up in that because she was good at it. And I think that's where a lot of people's futures can be, is if you're open to just like find out who you are and find out what you're good at. If you're a really techie person and you just love technology of ceramics, you love kiln building and you love glazes and you love, plaster molds, there's a lot of jobs out there for you in industry. Go to the Ceramic Expo, which is free to go to. It was like 2 weeks ago, or it was last week in Cleveland, Ohio. People should go check that out. I didn't go this year, but my boss went, and he was telling me there's all sorts of opportunities to be like people giving bids for like, can you make 100,000 of this product? We want somebody in America who makes stuff, and we need this thing made. Who do you know that can make it? And those kind of opportunities are like being floated all the time. Yeah, I think, industry is there are jobs out there. And I think you kind of have to put yourself out there and try to get yourself in. Like, for example, there's not that many glazed pottery manufacturers in this country anymore. But I'm thinking about Alex Matisse's place in
East Fork.
We're friends on Instagram and stuff. I don't know them that well. But I like their pottery. I think that they make nice designs. They have a glazed developer. If I didn't have the job I had and I was interested in looking for something, I would contact them and be like, hey, I'm interested in this. This is who I am. And maybe you don't even hear back, but maybe you do, and that's how these things often work. Is like, oh, well, why don't you come down and visit us? And if there's some symbiotic feelings, we can work together. Maybe you don't have the perfect job right away. Like when I was hired at Amoco, I was being paid a lot less than I'm being paid now. And I had to just like, I still want to do it. Let's try it. And then when it turned into a full-time job, like I'm making an okay amount. I'm going to keep doing this. You know what I mean? I don't need to search for something else. It's paying my bills. But it wasn't right when I started. And you just kind of have to put yourself out there. And it might not have worked at Amoco. I might have go to Mako after that and say, like, now I have an Amoco experience. Can I do this over there? You know what I mean?
I just thought of a really stupid metaphor, but this is a terrible metaphor and it's only going to make sense to the people in the US listening. But the guy who used to do the shtick for Verizon, the like, can you hear me now guy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He started doing the ads for somebody else. I don't know. He switched over cell phone companies. Like I just pictured you going from Amoco to a different company as the Verizon spokesperson.
How about now? Is it good now?
Do you like this glaze? Do you like this glaze now?
Do you like it now?
I digress. And so there's the next marketing shtick for your next glaze you're launching.
That is actually really good. We could get someone to dress up just like him. I mean, people now might not recognize it, but anybody who was watching TV 10 years ago, you have to have seen that commercial a million times.
Yes. There's something here. We can workshop it afterwards. We'll find it.
Okay.
I have no segue after that. I just got that visual stuck in my head and felt the need to share.
If I think of any other jobs, I'll let you know. It's hard because there aren't that many. I mean, even like if you were asking me, where's a good place to get a teaching job? It's like, I don't know. Look up right now. There's maybe a couple. There's not that many. But somehow all of us end up figuring it out. I think you just have to have some tenacity to keep kind of after it. And eventually opportunities will fall in your lap and you have to take them when they do. You have to be ready to take opportunities. And in ceramics, it often means, as you know very well, you might have to move, like you have to be willing to move. If you're not willing to move, the chances of you having a successful career in ceramics is just lower. And it's not undoable, but it's just lower because there's just not that many opportunities,
Yeah. But I do think the kind of through line, and even thinking about how much your work has changed in the last year and a half, your personal work, is what the trajectory actually looks like. How long it actually takes for something to come to fruition or to kind of hit that stride is a lot of what gets lost in social media and wherever else. But on the flip side, with social and with everything online, I think there's more opportunities than there ever have been to connect with people and for companies to kind of start thinking outside the box to say like, well, do we need Cory at our facilities? Why can't he do glaze research in New York instead of, oh, they're in Ohio, right? In Ohio, like.
They're in Indianapolis, but yeah, close enough.
Indianapolis. Yeah. Indiana, Ohio, they're kind of the same.
They really are. They're very close.
They both have that weird, like, are they the central time zone? Are they the East Coast time zone? I don't understand. Anyways.
Indianapolis is on East Coast and the rest of the state is not. It's weird. Yeah, it's right on the line there. So just to mess with people. Exactly. They want to pretend to be New York. They want to pretend to be their East Coast. Just kidding.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, for people, I think a lot of people that listen to the podcast are kind of like getting into ceramics, discovering that, okay, I want to spend as much time with my hands in clay as possible. This is amazing. But is there something that like you wish you could tell more people who are kind of finding this love of the art about how you're making it work, about, how to keep up with that tenacity in the long run?
I mean, I guess it's just to stay excited and stay curious because that's what's going to drive you. I don't know that you can even, I think that it just has to be there. But I think most people have that already. If they're interested in ceramics, there's that little spark. It gets you excited. You want to hurry into the studio. It's hard work and you still want to for some reason. It's Saturday and you could go to the beach, but you'd rather go to the studio. If you have that, which a ton of people do, just keep it going, just don't give up. I think there's an opportunity for everyone if you don't give up. And I think there's, just like you were saying earlier, there's so many opportunities for people now that might not be your career, but they're an opportunity, like I didn't just get out of high school. I did pottery in high school for a couple of years and I didn't finish that. I could throw whatever I wanted. I could throw normal pottery when I finished high school, but I didn't stop there. I went to undergrad and I learned a lot there. And then I did like 3 residencies, 3 tech jobs. I went to India for 6 months and taught a class. And then I came back as a building manager and then went to graduate school and then got this glaze development job. Like I kept having more experiences, meeting more people. And I was broke almost the whole time. And like, so what? It was really great. You don't have to have money the whole time. You don't have to have a 401k the whole time. There's so many residencies right now. And it's like, be a barista and make pottery. It's going to be one of the best times of your life. Just go do that. And I think graduate school is really great. It's not that you necessarily need it, but if you're in a situation where you can go to graduate school, what a gift you could give to yourself of 2 or 3 years, depending on which program you go to, of just time to make your art, feet to the fire. You have amazing people around you, all asking difficult questions. Usually there's a great facility. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, I think people should avoid going into debt.
I was going to say, I can think of a 5-figure reason not to do it. But aside from that, it sounds awesome.
Well, undergrad is usually that, but graduate school, a lot of places, not all, but a lot of places have an assistantship or some kind of program to make it affordable. Like Alfred, if you get into school at all in the MFA program, full ride, everybody. You have to, like I took out some student loans to pay.
I'm going to take that part out of the recording because I don't want that to get around. I don't want... let me get my application in and then I'll air this.
I mean, that would be interesting to talk about on this is what are all the deals that people have? Because Alfred's not even the best anymore. It used to be like 10, 15 years ago, it was a full ride then too. And that was like the best. And now it's not.
Yeah.
Now there's places that they'll pay you $30,000 to go to graduate school. You're going to teach some classes while you're there. So you're like working for it. But like,
Sure.
So what? You get a studio, you get a facility, you get the faculty, and you're going to get the teaching experience too. So that when you're done, you get a better chance of getting a job. There are schools like that for sure. A whole bunch. So I think as far as graduate school goes, as long as you're not married with 3 kids, it's like, and even if you are, plenty of people do it married. I think it's just harder. Or not married, but with kids. I came married. Yeah, graduate school, get a full ride or get some kind of deal where you're not going into crazy amounts of debt. And like, why wouldn't you do that? It's such a great opportunity. And you're going to meet a bunch of people. And often your faculty in graduate school, they're trying to get you jobs because they want their graduates to have jobs. It makes the school look good. It's just, you know what I mean? Like I've had the faculty here put a lot of effort into me to have opportunities. The Amico job, for example, Bill Cardy, who was ceramic engineering, but he went out of his way to help me get this opportunity at Amico. And like that kind of happens to a lot of people around here. One of the faculty, they see something in you and they see an opportunity and they connect the dots. And that's how a lot of jobs happen. I mean, in academia too, if you're getting faculty jobs, you need your professor's recommendations to get those jobs.
Oh, and in any, I mean, I think in every industry, it sounds trite. It's the phrase everybody's heard a million times, but it really is all in who you know.
Yes, it really is.
Half of the interviews I've been able to do on the podcast are because I know somebody who says, oh yeah, let me give you their email address.
Yep. Well, the same thing with the residencies too. I mean, residencies are so doable for artists. Like you're probably going to be poor, but it's like, so what? Eat beans if you have to. But usually it's like some kind of exchange thing. Don't pay to be at a residency. Do a residency where there's some kind of exchange. Like when we were when I first got to Claret Center, it was like 15 hours a week of like fire in the gas kiln and like clean up some area, or I can't remember what it was, but it was like a small job and there was several residents and you got your studio space and everything in exchange for that. And at Claret Center, there was teaching opportunities. Like you could teach kids classes and make pretty good money. Like we had this thing at Claret Center, you could make $55 an hour if you went to the elementary school to teach. And it was kind of like art in a cart. It wasn't great, but it was like you do what you have to do to make the money. And then you get your studio and you get the opportunities. You meet all the people in your residency. All the people I did residencies with, I'm good friends with them still. And those, they might not even be your professors that are recommending you things. It might be your peers, And so the more places you go and the more people you meet, the more peers you're going to have. But it's also an adventure beyond all that, right? Like even if you don't get the job at the end, it's like, I'm from Utah and I've been on the East Coast for a decade. And what a great adventure. I'm so happy I'm over here, And I think if I was doing a normal career where it's like, there's lots of jobs, you're going to be an accountant and you don't have to leave the town you grew up in because everyone needs an accountant. There's accountants everywhere. I'd probably be in the town I grew up in. And I don't think I'd be growing as much and developing as much. I wouldn't have met so many people. It's from moving all around the country and doing residencies outside of the country too that have led me to here. I mean, just like your husband, Francesco, I met him in Italy. That's so cool,
Yeah.
And I loved it there too. You went there too. What an amazing experience that was. So.
Oh, I mean, let's be honest. The dream is to figure out a way to be paid to make a viable life to sit in the Tuscan Hills and make things out of clay for the rest of my life. Sign me up.
You should interview Pietro.
That would be an eventful interview.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically just one of us that is however much older, 30 years older than me. And he had no money at one point and he just had this property and he built that studio in that house out of nothing. He had an idea, which was like, Americans want to be in Tuscany. Some people in America have money and they want to be in Tuscany for a month. And it's like, it's a good idea. Anybody could have that idea. That you don't have to get a job from wherever. You could be hustling yourself. You don't have to sell any pottery. You could sell Tuscany. You could do that here too. There's got to be places that are nice in the United States that are affordable to, like you could buy something in Maine. It's only nice in the summer, but you can see the ocean from it or whatever. And it's a retreat and you build it up and people want to come visit there. I mean, that's a viable way to make a living too.
Yep, absolutely. We've just got all sorts of ideas that we're just going to have to be like, patent pending, hold on. No, I'm kidding. Well, and with that, the way I see what you're doing is also like you picked a particular part of ceramics that you love, right? You're not also then trying to throw 200 mugs to sell at the local market. I don't know, maybe you are, and I'm just not aware of it. But, you're not also trying to run an Etsy shop on the side. You picked the aspects that you love and you committed all in on it. And I think, again, from the outside looking in, I think a lot of that laser focus is what drives so much creative thinking and success and whatever you want to call it, because you're not trying to be everything to all people all the time. And it's really kind of focusing in.
And that's good advice for anybody, right? I mean, it's good to have some breadth to like have experience in a lot of areas, but if you could be, what is it? A jack of all trades and a master of none.
Yeah. Like you have to, obviously, like you have the well-rounded experience, like you have to figure out what that niche is, right? You have to have the experiences and the exploration and the adventures. But then as you start to feel kind of called towards it, instead of feeling like, oh, I'm not a real ceramicist if I'm not hand building or throwing or whatever, whatever. And the way that actually connects in my brain to what we were just talking about as far as Pietro's vision is like, if more of us kind of found that specialty, I feel like we'd be able to come, like there'd be so much even more community around it, because instead of 5,000 people trying to figure out how to sell things on Etsy, it's like, oh, well, I specialize in this and I specialize in this and we're going to work together. When I talked to Matt Katz, he was talking about like the myth of the lone potter doing all the things. And his vision is more like the commune, where you've got the person that throws, the person that trims, the person that glazes, the person that researches. And that's really how it supports, I think, more, or at least keeps us all sane and sleeping.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know that there's any one way. I think there's probably, there are the potters that kind of do it all, and there's got to be some that are successful, but I think generally Matt is right about that. One thing I was just thinking about that I thought I might add is like, I love making glazes, but I'm also just a techie person. I like technology. I like other areas of technology and ceramics too, like kiln building and plat molds and things like that. Those are all things I was interested in. And if a different opportunity presented itself 5 years ago, I've been a glaze developer for 5 years. If something else popped up 5 years ago, it wasn't Amoco, it was a kiln company, and they gave me an opportunity. I'll bet you anything, I would be a kiln developer, builder person now. As long as I was being fulfilled from my day-to-day, like, am I, engaging creatively? Am I feeling valued? And am I growing? And am I happy is what that means to me. I would have done it. Do you know Fredrickson Kilns? Freddie Fredrickson, ring a bell?
Vaguely, mostly because we were just Googling kilns recently.
Okay. You can buy them through Sheffield Pottery, but he lives in Alfred. And he was the kiln tech at the school for 30 years. Then he retired. The whole time he had a kiln company, and it's just down the street. It's on Main Street also. It's just maybe a couple miles down the road. And they're the best kilns in the country. They're totally industrial. They're front loaders. They're generally big and just overbuilt. They go to cone 10, go to cone 12, hold it for a day, that kind of stuff. Just like being able to push you to the max. But I've known him since the day I moved to Alfred. And I thought before the Amoco thing came up, I just in the back of my head, I was like, I'm going to try to work for Freddie. I'm going to try to do, that'll be something that I do. And then it just didn't work out. And I got the Amoco thing. And so I don't have to. And I'm friends with Freddie and we see each other sometimes. But I think that could have been my life too. You know what I mean? And I think I'm an opportunist. I'm an opportunist, but I'm also like, I'm just trying to be myself and make sure I'm happy and interested. But it didn't have to be glazes. I think now it does. Like I put 5 years in, it's going to be glaze. Like I'm doing glaze. But yeah, I was just trying to make a point that it wasn't that I was like, because I think that would be a bad way to go about it. If you're like, no, I will take nothing except glaze development job or I'll starve. It's like, you might starve. It's like the same thing with people who are like, nope, I'm going to be a tenure track professor. And that's the only thing I'll ever be happy with. And it's like, those are the people that either get lucky or they spend forever and then they're jaded and disappointed. They just been adjunct, getting paid nothing for a long time. And they just weren't the flavor of the week at the time they were hiring or whatever it is. It's not their fault. You have to be open to other opportunities, I think.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Kind of what I'm hearing is like just getting your foot in the door, like staying involved and waiting to see what happens from there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have one other question, which is going to be a full right turn. And I know that I've already taken up more than an hour of your time. I can like cliffhanger this and not ask it because I don't know what your schedule is like.
No, I'm good. Yeah.
I am fascinated to hear how different your work was a year and a half ago, because I think so many of us who are newer are constantly presented with this idea of your style. You're getting something that is a complete look, that is consistent, that is whatever. At least for people who are thinking about doing this in a big long-term way, kind of having a look that they're known for, as opposed to like, I'm going to play around with everything under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could draw a trajectory, and I don't know how hard this is, but like, do you feel like there was a progression into it? Or the reason I'm asking too is because I think there is this romanticized view of the muse, right? That like Cory woke up one day and had this grand idea and voila, now you're an artiste with a capital A.
Yeah. Excellent question. No muse. To me, the work is just an evolution of the same thing. But I see how the outside would see that's different work, because it's now in drips and there's glaze involved or there's foam glaze and it looks a lot different. But to me, I'm interested in trying to do things that other people aren't doing. I like to figure things out. And so if it's already figured out, then it's not as interesting to me. So I want to try to figure something out. And I like to kind of dance with chance. Like I want to let go a little bit and, collaborate with nature, let's say, collaborate with kind of the will of what used to be the will of the pottery wheel, because everything would twist and spin. And so I was using the spontaneity of the twist and the movement of the wheel and torque happening to kind of make the pieces a little bit more alive, to kind of bring life to them. That was like not contrived, forced pattern. It was like this natural thing. And to me, the glaze drips and the foam drips is that also. It's kind of letting go. It's a little bit of controlled chaos. It's this dance that I'm doing. And it's still very bright and colorful. I'm still doing like all the drip glaze and all the foam. I'm still when I'm applying the material, it's still colored clay. I'm still making patterns with like cane of colored clay, and I'm just inserting them. But now I just don't throw it anymore. And instead of the wheel being what made the magic happen, it's the kiln and heat that made the magic happen. But to me, it's just an evolution of the same thing. So does that answer that kind of? Yeah.
That closes the loop for my brain. So, which was a whole left turn. And anything that you feel like before we wrap things up, anything you want to touch upon, or you feel like people should know that they don't know from the Instagram life?
Oh, yeah.
Small question, I realize.
One thing that I think I'll say, because of what I know that the kind of the purpose of this podcast is to kind of show what's really going on. I think I'd like to say that I have a terrible relationship with Instagram. It generally makes me feel bad. You know, I do it because it's a necessary evil, and I want people to see my work. I want to engage with the field, but generally, when I open up Instagram and I see, even if it's my friend or somebody doing something great, I can think it's great, but I also think, oh, I should be doing more. I should be doing better. I should be in that show. I should be, and I need to get in the studio. I should need to be working harder. Cory, what's wrong with you? You know, like that's the feeling that I get from Instagram. And so I actually don't really look at it very much anymore, or I try not to. If I've posted recently, I think probably just like everyone, I'm checking to see who's engaging with the post and who's commenting and who's liking it and whatever. And that becomes this whole other thing where it's like, why do I need to check again what's happened on that? I just checked 10 minutes ago. Like, why, Cory? But I still want to. And I think it's just it messes with your mind, you know? I don't want it to go away. I think it's been great for us all to be able to meet each other really, and to engage with each other on a daily basis, and to see opportunities. I've had all the gallery stuff I've done the last couple of years. It's probably all been through Instagram. You know what I mean? It has benefits. Like, it's definitely worth doing, and I'm going to continue doing it. But I just wanted to say, because I don't know, maybe everyone else feels this way too, or maybe they don't, but it generally makes me feel bad.
Yeah, I think that will probably resonate. I think that will also probably relieve and shock some people in a positive way, because yeah, I don't think that's unheard of whatsoever.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's at least going to be a percentage of people that are like, oh, good, me too. And even with like the followers, like I have 17.5 thousand. That sounds like a lot to me. It's never enough. There's always someone who has more. Then you're like, they're better though, you know?
You know, you did marry someone who now works in marketing. I feel like you could create a healthy... I'm just thinking about the way it works in our house. Like, I could see the conversation where you say, okay, honey, I'll do this if you do that.
I probably could do that. She's tired. She's working hard, and she doesn't need to be bothered with my stuff, I guess is what it comes down to. But you're right. And I do rely on Caitlin heavily for just advice on everything. You know, she's the number one person for me to check with everything, every move I make in my studio and in my job. She knows about every glaze I'm working on. She knows. It's like everything just we talk about our work.
Yeah.
So, and I appreciate her for that. So
that's awesome. I will send her that soundbite so that
yeah.
If a time comes in the future, like you're like, hey, I need her to feel appreciated. We'll make sure that that's
nice. You got my back. Thank you.
Awesome. Cory, thank you so much for your time. Even though we all have this complicated relationship with, where, instead of just Instagram, where should people come to connect with you? If it is Instagram or is not?
Yeah, do Instagram. That's the best way to connect for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, I do have a website and my email's on there. If you want to go that way, that's fine. I'll get your email. Email me. Instagram is great though.
Perfect. And I will put all those links in the show notes for everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. This was great.
And that wraps up episode 317 here on the podcast. And a big thanks for Amico for making, this entire episode happen, actually. Amico is currently sponsoring the Maker's Playbook podcast. And you may have noticed that Amico isn't taking any direct orders on their website currently. That might feel like a bad thing, but it's actually kind of awesome. For the past 8 months, Amico has been focusing on supplying their distributors first. In other words, they're focused on making sure that your favorite local shop is supported even before their own website. And you can easily pick up your favorite glazes like Potter's Choice Honey Flux or Rainforest Celadon on the shelf of your local shop and avoid extra shipping costs. Naturally, high demand and supply issues have made it hard to keep stores stocked these days, but Amico is dedicated to supporting your favorite small businesses first, now and in the future. And that, my friends, is putting your money where your values are. And you know I'm all about it. If you don't yet have a favorite local shop, you can find an Amico distributor near you by visiting amico.com/dealers. Now, if you've been loving these conversations, but feeling like you need them to continue, or listening to them leave you asking your own questions of how to figure out how to make a living from the things you make in your own life, then wipe the mud off of your hands right now, in this very moment. I'll wait. It's okay. And come visit makersplaybook.com/community, or click on the link in the show notes of whatever podcast app you're listening to. The community is our online membership where makers from all over the world join in supportive dialogue to figure this all out. Rather than the free-for-all posts of the massive Facebook groups out there, the community has intentional monthly themes where we can dig deep on anything from Instagram, which was our June theme, to pricing, last month's theme, to finding your ideal clients, our theme that's happening right now. So don't wait. And also, just to be clear, this is not a Facebook group. We're all about saving each other time. If you've been feeling like trying to crowdsource answers to questions on the internet has been wasting your time, and scouring through endless YouTube videos hasn't really answered the questions either, this is the place for you. Learn more at makersplaybook.com/community. Friends, I started the community literally because of how deeply I believe in how I end every one of these podcast episodes. And you heard me talk all about how I would never have even gotten through my first year in business, let alone the last 12, without a supportive network of colleagues. I talked all about that back on episode 305 if you want to hear more. So, until next time, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.